Self-limits, man. Whoa. Okay, calm down.
The Biden foreign policy is atavistic in the sense that it's governed by the idea that the United States is going to be able to remain roughly as hegemonic as it was in control of the world in the 1990s and 2000s. But if you look at the material bases of U.S. power, it just isn't that way anymore. If you look at like the amount of global GDP that the United States and the G7 countries control, just been going down for basically decades. So whereas in a rationalist polity, or even let's say in a democratic polity, which I don't think we really have here, you would have some discussion about this fact, right? Like the material conditions have changed, so the U.S. approach to the world has changed. But Biden, for a variety of reasons, I think his age is one. I think the people who he chooses to put in office is another, essentially acts like nothing has changed. And so you have this, confrontation, quote unquote, with China. What does that mean? It basically means that the United States is going to be forever able to station troops on China's border from now until forever. You get the war in Ukraine, which I find it personally hard to connect to any solid U.S. interest. And if Europe wants to support, Ukraine, that's fine. Europe is very rich and they should do so. So you basically have this literally Cold War foreign policy going forward without any recognition that the world has changed. So that's where I stand on that one.
Yeah, that's a great point. 20 years ago, there was a big celebration, 30 years ago in U.S. media, that finally the world was unipolar, and USA finally could unchallenged astride the colossus of the planet. And Biden is, I agree, Biden very much locked into that, not only as a personal proclivity, but he represents a big part of the corporate military intelligence complex. I mean, God knows it's incredibly lucrative. And so when Biden came in, he gave a speech that at last, the United States, this was his phrase, the United States again will, quote, sit at the head of the table, unquote, of the planet. And this is just like really perfect. And of course, has its roots in the Clinton wing of the party. When Hillary Clinton ran in 2016, she gave a big speech to the American Legion convention right before the November 16 election. And she said that the United States, she hauled out the chestnut and really banged on it. The U.S. is the one, quote, indispensable nation, unquote. And it's been pointed out, but not very widely, that if you look up the word indispensable, almost none of it applies to the United States. I mean, what is indispensable on the planet for the United States? I guess, as Medea is pointing out, arms dealers and arms buyers, but the world could get along very well without the USA in almost every way. Thank you.
Have about the foreign policy elements of his speech, or not just his speech, but more broadly of his presidency and where we're at in this moment.
I think it's more of the same, and I just want to agree with everyone. But it's interesting. I'm not sure that people are still believing the propaganda. Is my question. It does seem like we're in a post moment. Like I would be surprised if even the average person watching this believed in anything that Biden was going to say. And I think there's been this broad delegitimization brought on by social media that had there are stirrings of that in American culture always, but the deregulation of media after 1996, we're now a generation past that, and it does seem like that the old song and dance isn't working quite as well, which is why you have to have such a gerontocratic president, such an old guy, because there's only Pete Buttigieg and not really anyone else. So I'm just curious what you guys think if we're in this sort of liminal moment. But why hasn't something arisen to challenge it in a meaningful way? Is this just, we're circling the toilet drain of civilization, and that's pretty much it. And we're going to make absolutely no real changes on climate. We're going to make absolutely no real changes on consumption. I mean, no one, as far as I heard, have talked about the fact that Americans consume about 20% or 25% of the world's energy. No one's really talking about that. And so it just seems like it's all kayfabe. And this is true of his foreign policy, as I discussed earlier, but it's true of the whole phenomenon. But the sad thing is there really is no positive vision to emerge. There's no vital opposition. There's no vital resistance. Everyone just feels precarious and depressed and is on 4 pills of sertraline. So I'm just curious, like, where do we even go from here? It's like, what is the positive vision emerging? It's very grim.
Semi-witticism, folksy stuff. He probably said folks a dozen times. And when you go beyond the superficial, and after all, he's been doing this for 50 years. The guy knows the camera. He loves the camera, whether or not vice versa. I think you could call him an avuncular sadist, really. When you look at his foreign policy.
I like that.
Yeah.
Avuncular sadist. That's a really good word for it.
Good album.
Phrase for it. Album. Yeah. The avuncular sadist.
Yeah.
Joe Biden's greatest hits.